And here we are for one final time discussing Stargirl, Season 3, Episode 13, the season finale, the series finale, the end of a truly interesting murder mystery and a 3-year story arc to boot. It is Episode 13 entitled The Reckoning. If you are not interested in spoilers, please bow out now, but it's the freaking series finale. If you're not interested in spoilers at this point, I can't imagine you're watching this. So let's crack onto this. It's going to be a bit freeform here because it's the end of the show, at least as far as we're led to believe, and I'm just going to ramble on about some things. So let me give my thoughts about the episode first and some things that happened in it, because this is a build-up not only from this season, there are a lot of mysteries trying to be resolved in this season, but it also had to wrap up the show as a whole. Now, I do believe that the way this was structured from the beginning had a clear, concise 3-season arc already kind of established, but that's not to say that they weren't planning to go beyond that if they had the chance. From what it seems, the first 3 seasons were going to be our characters kind of coming into their own, building upon the legacy of the original JSA, and then truly kind of moving beyond that if it were to go after Season 3 into Season 4. So the fact that it actually ends after 3 seasons does have a bit of bookending on it as far as some catharsis as far as our characters go, but in the overall grand scheme of things, it kind of feels like everything was just getting started. So a lot of my favorite characters have things wrapped up in this episode, but not in a 100% type of way. So what do I mean by that? Well, Rick had this whole brewing storyline under the surface with both Grundy and his power abuse, his addiction storyline, whatever you want to call it. Those were both wrapped up and tied up here in this last episode, but I feel like had we been given another season, those would have actually been treated with a bit more care. I mean, I like that we're ending it on a sweet note and we're not kind of going off into the sunset, having him still feeling the effects of an addiction, but it seems like they were setting it up, and they just had to cut it off because we weren't going forward. They brought Grundy back. I didn't think they were going to do that. He tied into the story not at all, but the fact that we actually saw him as Hand, at least in this episode, was a good bit of closure for that as well. One character who I have been feeling like for at least part of this season was going to tie into things in a much more major way, possibly in a much more sinister way, was Zeke. And sadly, we got a reference to him a couple of times in this episode, but we didn't actually see him. And that leads me to a couple other issues that I want to say about this series. But some of the actors and some of the arcs haven't seemed as connected, and I'm wondering if because of certain reasons, restrictions and all that stuff, or just scheduling, they weren't actually allowed to film at the same time, or they were conflicts. I don't know. But it kind of feels like the Mike and Jakeem stuff for most of the season was taking place in somewhat of a sideline, disconnected from the rest of the group. And especially Artemis. I love the character. I love the actress. She did a great job in the scenes and episodes she was in. But for the most part, it feels like she wasn't actually there. And maybe they brought her back when they realized they were kind of tying things up. I'm wondering if her presence was supposed to be felt next season. After her parents were killed in this season, she would be brought back in a much more major way in Season 4. Since that didn't happen, they kind of scrambled last minute to get her in to film some closure for her as well. And I have to admit, I really liked that scene at the end where she took care of business and burned Icicle. That's one thing this show has kind of been doing in a great way. They're taking a more lighthearted, teen sort of friendly comedy aesthetic, and they're mixing it with real world implications, actual deaths, characters doing deranged things, pure evil in a character last season, a child being murdered. I mean, they're dealing with such a dichotomy of emotions and tones that it really feels kind of unique as far as this type of show goes. And I always like that more lighthearted golden age kind of feeling in comics, so maybe that's what they're going for, because in a lot of the older comics, they're cheesy, they're goofy, they feel completely out of reality, but then someone could get murdered and the characters, laugh at the end of the episode like, ha ha ha, and make a little pun about them. It's kind of that similar aesthetic, and that's something I've truly appreciated about this show. All of the actors did what they could in this last episode to make the payoffs feel the best that they could. I really did like this as a tie-up for the entire season. I do have one big question, and it's not really super pertinent, but why was the gambler murdered to begin with? That's kind of the thing that set the whole chain of events into motion this season. And I guess my only assumption here would be that he was murdered because he kind of found those cameras and Icicle wasn't yet ready to reveal himself to society and to be revealed as being alive still, because that whole master plan hadn't been established correctly yet, and because the gambler had kind of turned over a new leaf and wasn't going to be a villain anymore. I guess maybe he needed to get offed so that that plan wouldn't come out into the light too early. I'm not entirely sure. That does seem a little bit unexplained and unexplored, but I'm not going to hold that against it because it did set off the entire season, and I did think that this season overall was a great way to end the show. I really, really liked the little battle sequence at the end where we got most of our characters back in their suits. It was the first time we saw a lot of them in their suits for quite a while. The fighting was good. There were a couple of deaths. There were a couple of characters that were taken off the board. I don't know how I feel about the whole magic thing of turning the Ultra Humanite, well, not the Ultra Humanite, Dragon King in the body of that albino gorilla, not inhabited by the Ultra Humanite anymore. He was turned into like a plush toy by the Thunderbolt Genie guy. Not entirely sure how I feel about that. That sort of seems like a bit of a cheat to me. Well, I guess he's not dead, but that seems like a hell of a way to go out. The implications of being trapped like in a little chew toy for the rest of your life, kind of a bit odd and kind of a bit morbid, but like I said, the juggling of tones in this show makes that actually feel like it's earned. And then we get to see the reveal that Sylvester's brain isn't actually gone. I have a feeling that may have been tacked on and that wasn't originally part of it. Obviously, he probably would have come back in season 4 or something down the line. I do like the fact that we got Starman back as a brain. He's been reliving that horrible last scene before his brain got cut out over and over again on loop, and that would have to mess him up once he gets put back in his body. So I have to imagine there was going to be a whole season-long arc of him trying to recover based on what happened. My favorite part of the episode, and this is probably going to be the same for almost anyone, was that scene at the end with the Shade leading a tour of the JSA kind of command center, their meeting room with the table, and they had that little museum, and we got to see a little glimpse 10 years into the future of what the JSA would be built into, and that was great to me. I loved it, but it just makes me sad because it makes me miss the next 10 years of shows that we're clearly not going to get. They reference all of these things. They reference that Stargirl has become Star Woman. They've ended up getting Jade and her brother back in the group. They bring in some other new characters, children of the originals. They get Starman back. They allow Grundy to join the team. Icicle Jr. joins the team. All sorts of these things that I've really been hoping to see, plus other villains and other adventures I'm sure they went on, because Jay Garrick's Flash comes running in through a portal basically saying, oh, we need the JSA's help. We've got to stop some sort of villain out there. Conceivably connecting this to the main Arrowverse, which is also going off the air and ending when Flash ends. So now this is tied into the other shows, and that just means Stargirl and all her friends have gone on multiversal adventures and met other characters and classic characters, which now leaves the door open for us to see them in the future. But I was really hoping to build up this whole JSA a lot more, because this just seems to be such an untapped place for television and movie characters. Sure, we got to see a little bit of the JSA in Black Adam, but the JSA as a whole being the first real super team with such weird and eclectic characters is just ripe for being shown on TV. And it's not really the A-list characters that are, your Batman, your Superman, that are always having issues because of rights. You can't have a Batman on TV because we want to save him for the movies. Well, you're not really going to necessarily run into that similar issue with a lot of the lower tier characters in the JSA, and I feel like that's where you could spend a lot of time fleshing them out. I haven't really gone into the actual plot details of this episode. They wrapped up the battle. The ISA was obviously taken out. We never assumed they were going to be victorious. It was cool. We got to see our teams fight against each other. Family issues, that was all resolved at the end as well. And it truly felt like all of the baggage our characters have been dealing with, specifically by Ultra Humanite in Starman's body, kind of giving a lot of issues behind the scenes. Those all seem to be wrapped up, and had we gone forward, we probably would have had a much stronger and a much more determined team who was really secure in their identities as these heroes, and they were really ready to take the mantle. That's what this has been building up to. Our characters being passed the torch from the original team, even if it wasn't directly, and now they're ready to take that on and become the heroes in their own right. And going forward, we may have actually seen them taking on these superhero roles in a more direct capacity instead of just kind of doing it on the side when they weren't in school. Pat would have passed down the mantle of Stripe to Mike, because we saw in the future that became the case, and I really wish we got to see that. In Mike's final season here, he was kind of paired up with Jakeem, who really would be the director of the pen. Obviously, Jakeem turns out to be the correct choice. So where does that leave Mike? Well, obviously, based on some of the stuff going on, he would have ended up taking over pilotship of Stripe, and Pat, I guess, would have just been more like a mentor role, and that could have been great. But sadly, that's not to be, although there are a few rumblings about the show possibly being saved by the whole deal with Amazon. I'm not going to hold my breath, and even if it is that case, I don't think we're going to get the show back exactly as it is. We may get certain characters, we may get a new branded JSA show, but I don't think all the actors would be back, at least not in permanent roles, and it would probably have a different feel, at least that's what I assume. We're definitely not done with Stargirl. She's still set to appear in Titans, and based on the little tease at the end, the story never ends, whatever it said, I do believe we may have some opportunity to see them down the road, especially after all these shakeups at DC and Warner kind of settle down, and maybe they start bringing other characters back together through the multiverse. I think that could be great, because most of these characters are now the definitive versions of those characters. If they do bring them back, maybe even in animated stuff for a while, I'm hoping these versions of the characters get to continue on in some capacity, especially the ones that didn't really get their time to shine in the 3 seasons we've had. Some of the characters like the gambler's daughter, Becky Sharp, we meet her at the very end. I have to imagine that was going to set up the possibility of her joining the team in season 4, season 5. But since it was canceled, obviously the actress was already cast, so what was she told? Was she hired specifically to play a superhero version of herself in the future, or was she only brought in for basically an extra role? I know I'm talking a lot, but there's just a lot going through my mind right now because this is the end of the series. I might have to make another video, just my overall thoughts on the show as a whole. But as a season finale, I thought this was good. They maybe could have extended that little last battle scene a bit, but I do understand the fact that they needed to also throw in a lot of the wrap-up moments for the series. Maybe if this was not the series finale, they would have extended that final battle and cut back emotional wrap-up moments, but what they did have was wonderful. It kind of reminded me of the end of The Return of the King, where they had like 5 different endings. There were several different ending vignettes, I want to say, kind of wrapping things up, and it just left me overall with a nice feeling, especially because of the way they ended it with that whole 10 years in the future. This isn't the end of the story. They're still continuing to do all this stuff. There's lots of stories in between. Our characters are thriving. Even if that's something I have to imagine without having the show to watch, I guess that's a good place to leave it. But what did you think about Stargirl? What did you think about the ending? What do you think about the chances of finding these characters sometime down the line? Leave all your thoughts below. Hit the like button while you're down there. Subscribe if you want to. And until next time, keep on shining.